as I said, I decided, looking at the material, there was no way to cover it in one less than 2-hour segment. So I planned to divide the project into 2 pieces. The first, American Holocaust, as by the name and the material you saw, really talks about the destruction and also the criminality of those that caused the destruction. Part 2, People's Victory, will recognize the fact that in spite of that horrific destruction, they didn't win. And in fact, what happened was Vietnam was able to win their independence through their own efforts and the organization of their own revolutionary war for liberation. But also, with the support they got from the peace movement in this country and from around the world, and even the resistance of the GIs to the center to suppress them, they refused to fight. So these are the areas that I am covering in People's Victory. I see it as the rising part of the curve. The dramatic curve. American Holocaust was a downer because it's, you know, guess what, kid? Your country killed between 3 and 5 million people, and it's not all that high into the way you think it is. But the other side of that is, in spite of that, and in part because of the support they got from the American people, they were able to win their liberation and their independence. And truly, that is a people's victory. So I'm really, you know, I felt like a need to, and I've many times described Vietnam-American Holocaust as bitter medicine. But I said sometimes you need to take bitter medicine to get over a serious ailment. We have a serious ailment. On the other hand, the one I'm working on now is a very uplifting story. Because it's a story of how, you know, we said, and there was a chant in the 60s, you know, the power of the people is greater than the man's technology. But the results of the Vietnam War are what really proves that that is true. And that is something we can take forward to know that ultimately we will succeed in creating the kind of world we want to create. And that we will defeat the BPs and the Halliburtons and the McDonnell Douglases and all of the rest of them that, you know, want to profit by our misery and want to profit by our death. So this is the one I'm working on now. I went to Vietnam last year and I shot some footage which you'll see in here. I'm hoping to go back to Vietnam again to shoot some more. I've been working with the Vietnamese. They have been incredibly supportive of my first effort. And the funny thing is, when I did that, when I started on the Vietnam-American Holocaust, I had no thought of a Vietnamese audience. I made this for the American audience. And it's only when I started seeing hits on the website from Vietnam, I started getting inquiries, and especially when I took it there. And they were overwhelmed. They put it on TV, they sent out people to interview me, they wrote magazine articles about it, newspaper articles about it. And the funny thing is they said the same thing I thought. They said, we need this for our young people. We don't want them to forget what it took to get us to this point. I said, well, I did it for our young people because I don't want them to forget, because we're involved in another war now, because we forgot the lessons of the Vietnam War. So that's why I think this is an important effort. We need to keep that memory alive. We need to keep those lessons alive. There's no way, you know, they went through this whole thing, the Vietnam syndrome. There's no way they would have pulled an Iraq on us right after the Vietnam War. It was politically impossible. You know, they had to wait for a new generation to go on. They had to lull people. You know, they had to wait for the peace movement to die again. And now we're back in the same thing. So what you're going to see now compared to what you just saw is obviously much rougher. The first part, and I want some feedback on this because it's the most finished part 2 minutes. It's from Friendship Village, but my idea in this film is to first give you an introduction to modern Vietnam and then take you back into the history. And something else I want to say about this film I'm working on too. One of the themes I want to focus on in this, probably the main thing, is the relationship between the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnamese liberation struggle. You know, and questions I want to raise for rhetorical value in the film are, for instance, could Barack Obama even be president now if it had not been for the Vietnamese liberation struggle? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, could the Vietnamese have won their independence had it not been for the civil rights movement going on in this country at the same time? And once you start to address those questions, you find a million different threads that interconnect. Sometimes in ways that are very eerie. I spent a lot of time in Vietnam-American Holocaust on the Gulf of Tonkin incident because it is so familiar to us as a false cause for war that I wanted to examine it in detail. Well, that happened on August 4th, 1964. Well, something else was going on in the White House at that same time. And when you read the transcripts of the White House conversation, there were one about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and two about the 3 civil rights workers that were murdered in Mississippi, Cheney, Warner, and Goodman. Yeah, right. Their bodies were found on the same day as the Gulf of Tonkin incident. You know, there's one example how intertwined these things became. I found other recordings where McNamara and Saracen are talking about Kennedy's campaign, and Saracen or one of them is saying, you know, he needs to go down in the South and make some speeches and let these people know that they can't expect these boys to carry guns in Southeast Asia if they can't eat lunch at a counter in their own hometown. So the connection between these, you know, the contradiction between promoting America as, you know, the force of freedom and democracy in Southeast Asia when, you know, we couldn't even go to school, we couldn't even eat lunch counters, you know, in this country. It was one of the things that drove them to make the concessions of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
That's what, you know, and by the same token, you know, the fact that that movement was going on here, and that movement led directly to a very powerful anti-war movement. Because it was the same forces that came out of Mississippi Summer in the early civil rights movement that formed the core of the anti-war movement. The tactics, the people, the organizations went directly into that. So the civil rights movement meant that we had a much more powerful anti-war movement in this country. And that, in turn, was a great aid to the Vietnamese. So these are some of the areas I want to explore in this film. I think they're very, very important areas, you know, to be brought to the American consciousness. And the whole story about how Vietnam organized itself and won the independence is one that the American people know very little about and need to know a lot more. So with that, again, keep in mind this is rough, and I just put this together to give you an idea.